It seems Dana White can't seem to catch a break as he gets dunked on by everyone and is becoming the center of every drama that brews up, whether it be the Paul brothers or Oscar. He's got too much on his plate already, and now someone else has challenged him to a fight. We got much more on our UFC news plate, so stay tuned as we fork out some more. First, Dana White gets some heat from Chatri Sityodtong. When it comes to promoters in boxing, nothing really takes the cake like situations that circle around Dana White. He has talked smack about boxing promoters a bit lately, but all in good spirit as he's been respectful about the whole situation. He's really welcoming when it comes to new promoters trying to enter the MMA business and is trying to encourage others to enter into the MMA business and try their luck as well. Chatri Sityodtong is also an MMA promoter who runs the famous ONE Championship. He isn't a fan of Dana White as he recently lashed out at him and mocked him for his behavior. Next, Chatri's statement on the MMA Hour. Chatri Sityodtong had some words to say about Dana White. He stated that while he respects Dana White as a businessman and as a fellow MMA promoter, he doesn't respect him for the way he treats his athletes in the MMA business. Chatri Sityodtong stated in an interview on the MMA Hour, hosted by Ariel Helwani, that although he is a great businessman and he knows how to run things in the UFC, he doesn't agree with the way he handles and does things over at the UFC, and in his opinion, things could be done a little differently and fairly, so that fighters get a bit more on their plate and are treated better than they currently are as well. He also stated that it's pretty obvious that in a span of a few years and 2 decades, he's made the UFC into a phenomenal promotion that does everything on its own, from hosting the fights to broadcasting the whole shows as well, and it's not an easy job, and he has a lot of respect for him for making it big within his niche. There should be no ifs or buts when it comes to this. Chatri Sityodtong thinks that Dana White doesn't know much about MMA personally. He states that Dana White might not know how to fight on an individual level, despite handling so many UFC promotions in his lifetime around the year. Chatri Sityodtong stated that he simply doesn't know anything about martial arts, and he doesn't know anything about fighting in general as well. Chatri Sityodtong presented himself as an example and stated that he knows the ins and outs of MMA on a full scale and is dedicated to the sport on an individual level, but never has he seen Dana White spar or practice MMA or participate in a match of his own, and it goes without saying that what Chatri Sityodtong is saying just might be true. He says that Dana White is not a fighter. He definitely is a UFC promoter and a businessman, but other than that, he's just an MMA fan. And that's all there is to it. He said that he has some difference of opinion when it comes to the president of the UFC, and that's that. I am from the MMA community, Chatri Sityodtong, but Chatri Sityodtong looks at it from an entirely different perspective. He knows how it feels like to be an athlete, and that is where Dana White is lacking in information and perspective. Chatri Sityodtong came from a community of fighters that were entirely focused on the martial arts aspect of fighting and dedicated his life to it. His background was purely MMA, and he was basically raised in the sport. So in that respect, Chatri definitely knows how to take care of his MMA athletes. He takes care of them like they're his peers, and he gives them the due respect that they deserve, unlike Dana White does, where he treats his MMA athletes like piggy banks. Dana White doesn't come from the community side of the MMA. Rather, he founded the MMA business, and that's the only position that he knows to be in, while Chatri Sityodtong states that he came from the MMA community, and that's where he knows his place and position within the sport. Chatri Sityodtong had a lot more to say. He stated that if you never had the opportunity to be punched in the face or to be choked out by a fighter of the same caliber, then you don't know the first thing about respect and have the free range to think that you can disrespect people publicly. It's very, very different to be on the spectrum of the MMA community and the MMA business. He followed up by stating that if you have spent a lifetime of training and persevering in the art of MMA, then you'd have a different outlook when it comes to the sport and the athletes. He stated that when it all comes down to the itty bits, they have stylistic differences when it comes to dealing with fighters, and he just doesn't like the way he talks down to them. Will Chatri fight Dana? There was also a question posed if he would be willing to fight Dana White anytime soon, inside of the octagon or a ring, and Chatri said that he has been a long-time martial artist and has been practicing the art and sport of Muay Thai for around 35 years. He stated that he's a jiu-jitsu brown belt as well, and knows the ins and outs of many other martial arts as well. He also followed up with the fact that he trains around 5 or 6 times a week. When it comes down to fighting someone that is his age, then why shouldn't he? He stated that he's going to be turning 51 this year and is currently 50. He trains around 5-6 days a week, that comes down to around 1 to 2 hours a day, so he'd be willing to hop into the octagon with Dana White if it ever came down to it. Dana White on Cejudo versus Volkanovski. To come out of retirement and fight against Alexander Volkanovski and make history would have been enough for Henry Cejudo to return to an active competition, but it's unlikely to happen as Dana White is uninterested in the whole scenario. The UFC announced that Max Holloway and Volkanovski would be scheduled to fight again for the featherweight championship in the upcoming UFC 272 for a pay-per-view event that would be scheduled for the month of March. But the fight was canceled after the former champion suffered an injury and had to unfortunately withdraw from the matchup as a whole. This vacancy led many to replace Holloway, including Cejudo. The former 2-division champion has been indicating that he might fight in the UFC and come out of retirement sometime soon, which is around 2 years after he announced his retirement from the sport. Cejudo fought for the final time at UFC 249, where he successfully defended the Bantam title with a second-round technical knockout against Dominic Cruz. He believed that this would be the best time to make a comeback into the sport, but his request to meet Volkanovski went unheard, and the UFC brass decided to turn to Chan Sung Hung instead. Hurt by the fact that he was ignored, Cejudo scoffed at Volkanovski versus Jung. Dana White had some interesting things to say regarding the whole debacle. The Korean zombie has been there and has been fighting for a while, and he deserves a shot as compared to Henry Cejudo. The guy's retired for 2 years now, and he wants to come back and fight the top brass from the get-go? That's not how it goes down here. You have a lot of guys that are lined up waiting to take a shot at Volkanovski, and have been fighting 3 times a year and working their way up. And then we have Henry Cejudo, who announced his retirement 2 years ago and just wants to jump back into the sport anytime he wants? That's not how it goes down in this sport. Henry Cejudo responds. Henry Cejudo has decided to respond to the remarks made by Dana White, and he insisted on the fact that he was not fearful about jumping into the fray of all things if it could have meant that he'd become a 3-division champion. Despite his retirement, Henry Cejudo is confident about his standing. The Olympic gold medalist explained that his situation differs from that of George St. Pierre, who came back from a hiatus and won the middleweight title from the then champion at the time, Michael Bisping. George St. Pierre vacated the title afterwards and hasn't been fighting ever since. He stated that he'd be the first fighter in UFC history to become a 3-division champion if it came down to it, and he feels that it is very doable, and he just wants a chance at the title shot. He also stated that it might have been a race thing as well. He dropped out and vacated the title for the rest of the sport to be given a chance. Henry Cejudo stated that Dana White was just plain scared that Henry Cejudo might just become a 3-division champion, and that's something he doesn't plan on becoming a reality anytime soon. And that's all for today's video. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for future videos. And with that said, see you later and goodbye.